Hey there, fellow time travelers. Kayen here, your trusty guide through the dusty corridors of history. Welcome back to another Wednesday, which means it's time to unfurl the map, hoist the sails, and embark on another voyage into the past. Now, if you've been following along on our historical escapades, you know we love to shine a light on those pivotal moments that sometimes get a little overshadowed. And today, my friends, we're diving headfirst into a conflict that often gets a chilly reception in the grand narrative of the 20th century, the Korean War. It's a war that often bobs like an iceberg in the wake of the Titanic that was World War II and the turbulent waters of the Vietnam War. But don't let its seemingly quieter profile fool you. The story of the Korean War is as intricate, as surprising, and frankly, sometimes as downright bizarre as any other chapter in human history. So buckle up those metaphorical life vest history buffs, because this so-called police action, a term we'll dissect a little later, trust me, it's got some spice, was anything but a routine patrol. Chapter 1. The Line in the Sand. To truly understand the frozen conflict, we need to rewind the clock a bit, all the way back to the aftermath of World War II. Imagine the world breathing a collective sigh of relief as the Axis powers finally surrendered. For Korea, which had endured a long and often brutal 35-year occupation under Japanese rule, a takeover that involved some serious geopolitical arm wrestling between Japan, China, and Russia, culminating in a full annexation back in 1910. This surrender should have heralded a glorious dawn of liberation. Church bells ringing, parades in the streets, the whole shebang, right? Well, the reality was a tad more complicated. Enter the Allied powers, specifically the United States and the Soviet Union. These two burgeoning superpowers, with their rapidly diverging ideologies, decided, without so much as a polite nod to the Korean people themselves, to slice the Korean peninsula right down the middle along the 38th parallel. Picture this: two roommates, fresh from a massive party, deciding to divide the leftover pizza. Except this pizza was an entire nation with centuries of shared history. And these roommates had wildly different ideas about what constituted as palatable toppings. One favored the spicy flavors of communism, the other leaning towards the more democratic and cheesy side of things. Their reasoning? Purely logistical, they claimed. The U.S. would oversee the Japanese surrender in the South, while the Soviets would handle the North. A temporary arrangement, they assured everyone. But as the Cold War tensions began to simmer and then boil over, this temporary division hardened like a forgotten slice of pizza left in the fridge. By 1948, the line in the sand became a concrete wall, birthing the Republic of Korea, or South Korea, in the South, and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or North Korea, up north. It was like setting up two fiercely competitive lemonade stands right next to each other and expecting no sticky situations, no sugar-fueled squabbles. The stage was set for a much bigger showdown. The invasion begins. Now, let's fast forward a couple of years to June 25, 1950. North Korea, emboldened by the perceived support of their Soviet allies, and, in the shadows, a growing nod from their future Chinese comrades, decided the most efficient way to reunite their divided nation was through a good old-fashioned invasion of the South. Surprise! The world, particularly South Korea and their American allies, were caught somewhat off guard. This wasn't just a minor border skirmish. It was a full-scale blitzkrieg, a lightning-fast thrust across the arbitrary 38th parallel. President Harry Truman, a man not known for mincing words, reacted swiftly. He invoked the Truman Doctrine, essentially drawing a line in the sand against the spread of communism. A big, bold, no further sign for the era. And in a move that was unprecedented for the young United Nations, American troops under the UN banner were rapidly deployed to bolster the struggling South Korean forces. Can you imagine the sheer shockwave that rippled across the globe? This seemingly regional spat had suddenly exploded into a major international incident, a dangerous flashpoint in the burgeoning Cold War. A dramatic tide turn. Initially, the North Korean forces, fueled by surprise and Soviet-era weaponry, pushed deep into South Korean territory. The situation in Seoul, the capital, looked increasingly dire. But then, in a move that could have been ripped from the pages of a Hollywood script, the UN forces, with the Americans leading the charge, executed a daring amphibious landing at Inchon. Think of it as a strategic ninja move, cutting off the North Korean supply lines and forcing a dramatic and hasty retreat back across the 38th parallel. Now, here's where the narrative takes a sharp turn into the realm of ambition. Flush with their initial victory, the UN forces didn't just stop at the original border. Nope. They kept pushing north, their sights set on nothing less than the complete unification of Korea under a democratic banner. Cue the dramatic music, folks. This bold move, however, didn't sit too well with the People's Republic of China. They viewed the rapidly advancing UN forces as a direct threat to their own border along the Yalu River. In late 1950, like a human tidal wave, the Chinese People Volunteer Army, a rather polite way of saying a massive influx of troops, poured across the Yalu River, crashing into the UN forces and pushing them back south with considerable and brutal force. It was like a high-stakes game of tug-of-war, with two incredibly determined teams pulling with all their might over a muddy, blood-soaked middle ground. The momentum had shifted again, and the war was far from over. The frozen front. For the next 3 long, agonizing years, the Korean War descended into a bloody and brutal stalemate. The front line solidified around the infamous 38th parallel, transforming the landscape into a desolate expanse of trenches, barbed wire, and the relentless roar of artillery. Think of the static, grinding warfare of World War I, but add in the biting Korean winter and subtract any fleeting moments of holiday truce. This period became a horrific war of attrition, a meat grinder where both sides endured unimaginable hardships. And let's not romanticize the conditions, folks. The Korean peninsula in winter is no postcard destination. Soldiers on both sides suffered terribly from frostbite, trench foot, sometimes losing toes to the bitter cold even before they encountered the enemy. Imagine that. Your own body betraying you before the actual fighting even begins. And speaking of unpleasantries, early in the war, American soldiers often had to rely on water from rice paddies that had been, well, let's just say they weren't exactly pristine mountain springs, if you catch my drift. Survival in this frozen hell was a constant battle in itself. The human cost. This brutal back and forth, coupled with the unforgiving conditions, exacted a staggering human cost. For the United States alone, approximately 36,574 military personnel paid the ultimate price. The vast majority of these were battle-related deaths, but tragically, many also vanished as missing in action, were captured by the enemy, or succumbed to wounds sustained in the fighting. Heartbreakingly, a small percentage also perished in non-hostile accidents. In total, over 92,000 American soldiers were wounded, and around 8,000 simply disappeared. These numbers, stark and cold, serve as a grim reminder of the profound human toll of this often overlooked conflict. Not a peace, but a pause. Finally, after what must have felt like an eternity of frozen ground and exploding shells, on July 27, 1953, an armistice was signed. Now, pay close attention, history sleuths, because this is a crucial distinction. An armistice is not a peace treaty. It's more akin to a timeout, a weary agreement where both sides essentially say, "We're too exhausted and bloody to keep punching each other right now, so let's just stop." And that's precisely what happened. The guns fell silent, but the Korean peninsula remained cleaved in two, roughly along that same stubborn 38th parallel. It was a stalemate, a draw, leaving the two Koreas in a state of suspended hostility. In fact, to this very day, no formal peace treaty has ever been signed. And U.S. forces and UN representatives remain stationed in South Korea. A tangible and sobering reminder that this conflict never truly reached a conclusive end. Why the forgotten war? This brings us to a rather perplexing question. Why is a war with such significant casualties and such lasting geopolitical consequences often relegated to the dusty corners of our historical memory, labeled the forgotten war, or even dismissed with the rather flippant term police action, as President Truman initially called it? Well, as is often the case in history, timing played a significant role. The Korean War found itself sandwiched between the monumental global conflict of World War II, still vividly etched in the world consciousness, and the later, deeply divisive Vietnam War, which would dominate American thought and protest for years to come. It was like the middle child desperately vying for attention between two much louder siblings. Furthermore, the lack of a clear-cut victory might have contributed to its fading from public memory. There was no triumphant mission accomplished banner, no iconic surrender ceremony, just a weary cessation of hostilities. Early television coverage of the war was also limited, and let's be honest, the unfamiliar landscape and languages of Korea didn't resonate with many Americans in the same way as the European and Southeast Asian theaters. It simply didn't capture the popular imagination in the same way. A lingering divide. But despite its often forgotten status, the Korean War's legacy is anything but absent. The Korean peninsula remains a stark and tense division, a tangible scar left by the Cold War. North and South Korea exist as two vastly different worlds. The North, a totalitarian state under the Kim dynasty, stands in stark contrast to the democratic and economically vibrant South. Their economies, international relations, and even subtle nuances in their shared Korean language have diverged dramatically. Yet beneath these stark differences lies a shared history, a common cultural root, and the enduring pain of a nation torn apart. The Korean War, while ending in a stalemate, wasn't entirely without consequence. It did arguably succeed in containing the spread of communism on the Korean peninsula, and demonstrated the United States' commitment to its containment policy. However, it serves as a potent and tragic reminder of the devastating human cost of ideological conflict and the enduring complexities of international relations. The chill of that forgotten winter still lingers in the air today. Now, If this deep dive into the chilling realities of the Korean War has sparked your historical curiosity, if you want to unravel more of these intricate threads of the past, then make sure you hit that like button below. It really helps us reach more history enthusiasts like yourself. And while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of our future historical explorations. We've got so many more stories waiting to be unearthed. And for those of you who want to directly support our mission of bringing you these historical narratives, consider becoming a Patreon. Your support helps us keep the History Rats ship sailing smoothly and allows us to delve even deeper into the fascinating, sometimes bizarre, and always important stories that shaped our world. You can find the link in the description below, and we really appreciate every one of you. Well, this has been your final historical voyage with me for the month of April. But don't despair, my history-loving friends, because May is just around the corner. The entire month of May will be turning our gaze much closer to home. That's right. May will be dedicated to exploring the rich and fascinating local history right here in our own backyard, Back Lake. I am incredibly excited to dig into the stories and secrets that lie hidden just around the river bend. So stay tuned for a month of local historical adventures. Until then, keep those historical curiosities burning bright, and as always, be good to each other.